Matt Armstrong never stood on a stage and declared war on the automotive industry. He never marched into the headquarters of the world's most prestigious supercar manufacturers demanding change. He didn't launch a campaign against luxury brands or encourage millions of people to question the value of six-figure automobiles. Instead, he did something far simpler. He rolled damaged cars into a modest workshop, picked up a camera, and showed people exactly what happened after the dream collided with reality. That simple act changed everything. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in any industry isn't the loudest critic. It's the one who quietly reveals what everyone else prefers to keep hidden. What happens when a car worth hundreds of thousands of dollars is stripped down to its bare frame? What secrets are buried beneath flawless paint, handcrafted leather, and marketing campaigns that promise engineering perfection? More importantly, what happens when millions of ordinary people are finally allowed to see those secrets with their own eyes? This isn't merely a story about exotic automobiles. It isn't even a story about legal disputes or corporate policy. It's a story about who controls the truth once a product leaves the showroom. And in an age where one creator with a camera can reach more people than an entire publishing company, that question has become more important than ever before. Stay with us, because by the end of this story you'll understand why three of the most powerful names in the automotive world all found themselves responding, not to another manufacturer, but to a mechanic from England who refused to stop showing people what he saw. Long before millions of subscribers knew his name, Matt Armstrong's world looked very different. There were no sponsorship deals, no international recognition, no waiting lists of manufacturers hoping to collaborate with him. There was only hard work, stubborn determination, and a fascination with broken machines that most people had already given up on. While others admired polished supercars from behind velvet ropes at motor shows, Armstrong was more interested in understanding what happened after those cars were damaged. He wanted to know why they failed, how they were built, and whether they could be brought back to life. That curiosity became an obsession. Instead of following the traditional path into the automotive industry, he learned through experience. Every stripped bolt, every damaged suspension component, every cracked carbon fiber panel became another lesson. He wasn't studying engineering from textbooks. He was studying it with grease on his hands. The workshop became his classroom. The cars became his teachers. For years, almost nobody noticed. Then something unexpected happened. A camera entered the workshop. At first, filming the rebuilds wasn't about becoming famous. It wasn't a calculated business strategy designed to dominate YouTube. It was simply a way of sharing the process with other enthusiasts who loved understanding how machines worked beneath their beautiful exteriors. Viewers weren't watching glossy advertisements. They were watching reality. Bent chassis, destroyed engines, crushed suspension, thousands of individual parts spread across a concrete floor. Most importantly, they watched something few manufacturers ever wanted customers to think about: repairability. Every rebuild answered questions buyers rarely considered before spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a performance car. How difficult is this part to replace? How expensive is that repair? Why was this component designed this way? Could an independent mechanic actually fix it? Those weren't questions typically answered in television commercials or polished promotional videos. Yet millions of viewers discovered they wanted those answers. Slowly, Armstrong's audience grew. Then it accelerated. Subscribers turned into hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands became millions. People weren't simply watching damaged supercars being repaired. They were watching luxury myths being dismantled one bolt at a time. The timing couldn't have been more significant. Over the past decade, social media fundamentally changed the relationship between companies and consumers. Brands no longer controlled every conversation surrounding their products. Ordinary people now possessed cameras capable of broadcasting information across the world in minutes. For decades, automotive journalism followed a familiar rhythm. Manufacturers unveiled a new model. Journalists attended exclusive launch events. Professional photographers captured perfect images under ideal lighting. Reviews praised performance, craftsmanship, and engineering innovation. Everyone benefited from the relationship. Manufacturers received positive exposure. Publications received access that attracted readers. Consumers received carefully packaged information. But independent creators weren't bound by those traditions. They didn't need invitations to luxury hotels. They didn't depend on manufacturer-owned press fleets. They weren't required to maintain corporate relationships to keep producing content. Instead, creators like Matt Armstrong built their credibility somewhere entirely different. They earned it from viewers. Every honest rebuild strengthened that trust. Every mistake shown on camera increased authenticity. Every challenge overcome inside the workshop reminded audiences that what they were watching wasn't marketing. It was reality unfolding in real time. That difference proved incredibly powerful. When Armstrong purchased heavily damaged exotic cars at salvage auctions, viewers weren't just entertained by dramatic restorations. They became students. Each video quietly educated millions about engineering decisions that normally remained invisible after a car left the factory. Carbon fiber construction suddenly wasn't just a marketing phrase. It became something viewers could actually see. Structural repair methods weren't mysterious technical language anymore. They became practical challenges unfolding before their eyes. Luxury ownership stopped feeling abstract. It became understandable. That's exactly why his audience kept growing. Many viewers would never own a Ferrari. Most would never drive a Bugatti. Yet they still wanted to understand how these extraordinary machines were built, and whether the extraordinary prices attached to them truly reflected extraordinary engineering. Without intending to, Armstrong had become something far more influential than another YouTuber. He had become an independent source of consumer education. That distinction mattered, because unlike advertisements, educational content changes purchasing decisions. Someone considering a used supercar might watch an entire rebuild series before spending their savings. Insurance companies noticed repair costs being discussed openly. Independent mechanics compared techniques in comment sections. Collectors debated structural repairs with unprecedented detail. The conversation surrounding luxury automobiles slowly shifted. Instead of asking only how fast a car could travel, people began asking how easily it could be repaired. Instead of admiring flawless showroom presentations, they wanted to know what waited underneath. Those questions represented something manufacturers couldn't easily control. Not because the answers were necessarily damaging, but because the questions themselves belonged to someone else. And for companies whose reputations were built as much on perception as engineering, losing control of the conversation was something entirely new. It began quietly. No dramatic announcements. No public accusations. Just subtle changes that, at first glance, appeared completely unrelated. Almost nobody connected the dots. But before long, the world's most prestigious automotive brands would begin sending signals that suggested something had changed behind closed doors. And whether intentional or not, one mechanic with a camera had become impossible to ignore. The first company to move wasn't necessarily the most famous. It was simply the first to recognize that something fundamental had changed. For years, the relationship between luxury manufacturers and independent repair shops had followed an unspoken understanding. Cars that suffered catastrophic accidents often disappeared from public view. Some became donors for spare parts. Others were quietly dismantled. A small number found their way back onto the road after painstaking restoration, but very few people ever witnessed that process. Matt Armstrong changed that. Instead of hiding the damage, he documented every cracked panel, every twisted suspension arm, every electrical nightmare, and every engineering decision that determined whether a six-figure supercar could actually be saved. Millions watched. Then millions watched again. The audience wasn't fascinated simply because expensive cars were broken. They were fascinated because they were finally seeing what manufacturers had never intended to become entertainment. They were seeing the anatomy of luxury. Carbon fiber that looked indestructible in advertisements suddenly appeared fragile after a high-speed collision. Complex electronic systems became visible bundles of wiring. Beautiful bodywork came off, revealing structures that looked surprisingly ordinary beside extraordinary price tags. None of this meant the cars were poorly engineered. Quite the opposite. Many viewers walked away with greater respect for the complexity involved. But respect is different from mythology. Luxury brands don't simply sell engineering. They sell imagination. They sell exclusivity. They sell the feeling that perfection exists somewhere beyond ordinary reach. That illusion becomes more difficult to maintain when millions of people can watch every bolt being removed from the vehicle in real time. It wasn't long before subtle changes began appearing across the industry. McLaren was among the first manufacturers to reinforce its position regarding heavily damaged vehicles rebuilt outside its official network. Factory support became increasingly tied to authorized repair channels. Warranty coverage, technical assistance, and access to certain components all became part of a carefully controlled ecosystem. From a business perspective, the reasoning made sense. High-performance vehicles are incredibly complex machines. Improper repairs can create genuine safety concerns. Manufacturers naturally want to protect customers from poorly executed restorations that could damage both lives and reputations. But there was another side to the discussion. Independent mechanics argued that many rebuilds were performed to exceptionally high standards. They believed experienced specialists could safely restore vehicles without requiring complete dependence on factory-approved facilities. That disagreement had existed for years. What changed was visibility. Millions of viewers were now watching the debate unfold instead of hearing about it in specialist automotive circles. Soon afterward, Ferrari introduced stricter standards governing which vehicles qualified for its prestigious certified pre-owned program. The policy itself wasn't shocking. Luxury manufacturers regularly adjust certification requirements. Yet observers couldn't ignore the broader pattern emerging across the industry. Brand after brand seemed increasingly determined to reinforce the distinction between factory-controlled ownership and independently restored vehicles. Bugatti delivered perhaps the clearest message. Rather than encouraging owners to explore independent restoration, official guidance emphasized factory evaluation before major repairs following serious insurance incidents. Again, from the manufacturer's perspective, the recommendation was understandable. When a vehicle costs several $1 million, every structural decision carries enormous financial and engineering consequences. No responsible company wants unsafe repairs associated with its name. Yet timing has a way of shaping public perception. Within a relatively short period, 3 of the world's most recognizable supercar manufacturers had all strengthened policies surrounding damaged vehicles. Coincidence? Perhaps. Natural industry evolution? Possibly. Direct responses to one YouTube creator? Nobody officially said so. Nobody needed to. Sometimes what isn't said attracts more attention than any public statement ever could. The automotive community began connecting dots. Forums filled with discussions. Repair specialists debated policy changes. Collectors questioned future resale values. Independent workshops wondered whether access to parts would become increasingly difficult in the years ahead. Meanwhile, Armstrong continued doing exactly what he had always done. He rebuilt cars. He explained the process. He uploaded another video, then another. His workshop didn't suddenly transform into a courtroom. It remained a workshop. Yet beyond the walls of that garage, another battle was quietly taking shape. This one wasn't about engines. It wasn't about suspension geometry or carbon fiber tubs. It was about information. More specifically, who gets to control it. For decades, corporations relied upon familiar methods of protecting their image. Public relations teams managed messaging. Advertising shaped perception. Exclusive media access encouraged favorable coverage. Those strategies worked remarkably well in an era when newspapers, television networks, and automotive magazines served as the primary gatekeepers of information. But YouTube changed everything. One independent creator with millions of subscribers could now influence public opinion as effectively as an international publication. Perhaps even more effectively, because audiences increasingly trusted creators they believed had nothing to gain from protecting a manufacturer's reputation. That shift represented something larger than Matt Armstrong. It represented a redistribution of influence. Traditional media often depended on maintaining relationships with manufacturers. Independent creators depended on maintaining relationships with viewers. Those priorities aren't always the same. And where priorities differ, conflict eventually follows. The digital world introduced another complication. Unlike newspapers or television broadcasts, online content exists within platforms governed by automated systems. Videos can be reviewed. Claims can be submitted. Disputes can consume weeks or months. Even when creators ultimately prevail, uncertainty itself becomes exhausting. The pressure isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's administrative. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's simply the knowledge that every upload carries risks invisible to the audience watching at home. Creators across numerous industries have spoken about navigating complex copyright systems, platform policies, and legal uncertainty while trying to produce honest content. Whether discussing technology, consumer products, or luxury automobiles, the balance between criticism, education, and intellectual property remains an evolving conversation. Matt Armstrong found himself standing directly in the middle of it. He wasn't accused of stealing vehicles. He wasn't exposing confidential factory documents. He wasn't secretly recording inside manufacturing plants. He was filming cars that had been legally purchased and documenting their restoration. Yet those videos carried consequences far beyond entertainment. Every episode encouraged viewers to ask difficult questions before making expensive purchases. Every successful rebuild demonstrated that catastrophic damage didn't always mean the end of a vehicle's story. Every detailed explanation challenged assumptions that only manufacturers possessed meaningful expertise. None of those ideas required dramatic accusations. Facts alone were enough. Perhaps that's what made them so powerful. Because facts don't shout. They simply remain. And once millions of people have seen something for themselves, convincing them they didn't becomes almost impossible. As discussions intensified across the automotive community, many expected Matt Armstrong to become more cautious. Some believed he'd quietly change his content. Others assumed he'd avoid controversial rebuilds altogether. Instead, he picked up his camera once again. And this time, the story was no longer just about rebuilding supercars. It was becoming a story about rebuilding the relationship between ordinary consumers and the truth they believed they deserved to see.